Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of our video series with our brother Dan Gibson, which we have entitled Refuting Dan Gibson. And obviously, I want to emphasize with a question mark. In other words, we are trying to show that there has been numerous attempts by many people to make a claim that the entirety of Dan Gibson's theory has been decimated, when in fact, it's quite possible that they are talking about one element here, one element there, but that doesn't mean the rest of the data has been at least decimated. I would argue even the stuff that they are claiming to have been refuted, it's still open for discussion. I mean, it's one thing to say, I am responding to your argument. It's another one to say, you cannot really refute me back. I mean, it's a give and take here. And when it comes to data, the door is wide open for anyone to continue with the research. So today, we are going to have another discussion about another claim that we'll let our brother Dan respond to, which is the claim that idol worship wasn't permitted in the Byzantine Empire. Dan, welcome back, and help us understand what is the significance of such claim and why do people try to emphasize it?
Sure. Okay. The Byzantine Empire was part of where Petra was. Petra was in the very southernmost part of the Byzantine Empire. In pre-Islamic times, we know that they made sacrifices there at the altar of Hubal, and these sacrifices were part of the pre-Islamic story before Muhammad came on the scene. And people say, well, this couldn't have taken place in Petra because Petra's in the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire didn't allow pagan worship, especially sacrifices. And it sounds like a very good argument, and there's nothing wrong with the argument as it's stated. It's true that a number of things were passed. I'm just going to read a couple of these. Theodosius, that's around the year 380. He banned all public and private sacrifice. He ordered the closing of pagan temples. There were 3 edicts that were issued up to the year 392. And specifically, these edicts zeroed in on blood sacrifices, sprinkling incense on altars, hanging up sacred meat on trees, and raising turf altars that were just built up out of the ground. These were acts of high treason. So, I mean, they really didn't want it. So the concept of sacrifice and pagans themselves were not abolished from the empire. They just didn't want these kinds of acts going on. And there's a host of articles and books written about this topic, so you can go and read about it. So the general practice, however, in the Byzantine Empire was the toleration of all religions. People were allowed to follow their own religions. They were especially worried, although, about pagan practices influencing Christians and appearing in Christian churches. And so they really took a stand against some of those things. However, there is lots of clear evidence that all the way up and into the 6th century, paganism did survive and sacrifices did take place. And certain places, they turned a blind eye to these things. Athens was one of these. All the different gods in Athens of the Greeks, still those gods were up there and sacrifices continued. Athens was just accepted. Those are the Athenians, that's Athens, that's what happens there. And so that was sort of a blind eye. Another place that's specifically mentioned is Gaza. Gaza and Alexandria over in Egypt were also places where pagans still maintained their pagan practices right into the 6th century. And so it's not hard to believe that the city of Petra could have continued there as well. Now, there's something else we need to catch on here and to understand is that the Byzantine borders were what I call soft borders. They were policed by client tribes, and we're going to bring up a slide and try to show you some of these client tribes. what we mean by client tribes is that the Byzantines didn't have a large enough army to fight all the battles they were fighting and still police their own borders. So they allowed other tribes. So in the south, you can see the southern part of the Byzantine Empire down in the Arabian Peninsula, the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. You see the Ghassanid tribe there, okay? And they are the client tribe. They were a Christian tribe, and they were given the right to run that part. They were semi-autonomous. They had their own judges. They had their own standing army. They are the ones who policed that area on behalf of the Romans. So the Roman, which we call the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, we use that name synonymously, Roman and the Byzantines. They didn't have to have any of their soldiers on that border. So when you come to the city of Petra, there's no evidence of military in that city. There's no barracks. There's no fort. It was not a military city in any way, shape, or form. There were forts 20, 30, 40 kilometers outside of this area, but not in the city itself. So Petra itself wasn't under the Byzantines directly. It was under the Ghassanids, and they are the ones who administrated this area. And there's no record of Ghassanids ever denying pagans the right to worship within their control. They had to live with these pagans, and so they had to balance it and so forth. So there's no evidence that the edicts that were made in Constantinople were ever applied all the way down south in the city of Petra, just as they weren't applied in Alexandria or Gaza or even in Athens. So I think there's a good argument that can be made that pagans could have and probably did worship, because we don't see the activities in all the temples in Petra. We don't see them as ceasing. They were active at this time, even during the time of the life of Muhammad. We can see that these temples continued to function. So that's my argument, and I don't know how else to respond but to say, yes, the edicts were made, but down in Petra and in some of these other places, they would have continued on with their pagan sacrifices.
Well, I like that answer. And of course, I want to point out something. There is always this talk about the fact that Muhammad, if again, the person that we know him existed in the same way that the traditions present him, that his wife Khadija was actually a Christian. It makes sense because it appears that the Ghassanites were in that region who are known to be Christians. Now, whether you would argue they were in a pure sense of what Christians would look like, or at least have their own version of that, all that to say is it makes sense why the Quran from the get-go began to discuss Christianity or Christians, technically speaking. And at the same time, if indeed Khadija was a Christian and Waraqa ibn Nawfal, of course, was a priest, it all makes sense when it comes to that region versus Mecca, for instance.
That's right. And I find it interesting when al-Tabari, he wrote his history. I've got it back here behind me, the history of Islam. He's got all these 30-some volumes. He gives an entire volume over just to this period and just to the Ghassanids and to these client tribes, and to understand what was going on in Islam before Muhammad arrived on the scene. If he was down in Mecca, it wouldn't have made any difference. That all would have been 1,000 kilometers away, and just, it wouldn't have influence. But in his history, these client tribes play a very big role in the history before Muhammad comes on the scene. So it's very important to them.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait until we visit again with another argument and a way to respond to that argument. As always, thank you so much for your time, Dan, and thank you everyone for watching this series. I hope you've been sharing it with others. And we encourage you, of course, to interact with us, send us questions. I will make sure that we'll pass them on to Dan. That would help us build more contents for future shows as well, because we want to continue doing this. I'm sure new arguments will arise, and it behooves us really to respond to those arguments, as long as they're legitimate arguments, as long as they're arguments based on facts, not emotions. And therefore, we will do the best that we can to present to you a way to respond to it, or at least explain it. I mean, let's use the word explanation. And with that in mind, I can't wait until we meet next time to provide another explanation to another one of those arguments against Dan Gibson's theory. Thank you so much, everyone. This is Al-Fadi, over and out. God bless. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.